Travel is more than just ticking off countries. It's about the people, the culture, the food, the moments. I'm Pippa Hudson, and on Wonder the World, I invite you to join me every week as we explore destinations both near and far, with the help of fellow adventurers who share their unique travel stories. Listen to my podcast wherever you get them.
702 is live from Africa's biggest tourism marketing event, Africa's Travel Indaba, brought to you by South African Tourism.
Welcome back. You might have noticed that the unemployment stats came out yesterday. South Africa's official unemployment rate has increased, as you would have heard in Eyewitness News and elsewhere, to 32.9% in the first quarter of 2025, and jumping a full percentage point from the last quarter. This exceeded expectations from some experts who had thought that a smaller climb of just about 0.2 percentage points. And the first quarter of the year historically often shows a drop-off in employment as businesses shared seasonal hires of the festive season, and thousands of fresh matriculants and graduates enter the job market. Thus, they affect the numbers somewhat. But this is a very serious issue, and we had asked Matthew Parks, Cosatu Parliamentary coordinator, to have a word with us on this. Mr. Parks, thanks for your time. Welcome to 702. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
Your initial reaction, I know that you're quite vocal on the plight of the unemployed and just generally the working class. To what extent is this a serious dent on the efforts to create jobs and generate and stimulate this economy that has been battling to grow?
So it is quite disappointing. The unemployment expanded definition has increased to 43.1%. Youth unemployment to 72%. And, whilst we recognize that this is for the first quarter of the year, so it follows the last quarter of last year. So there always is an increase in jobs, often temporary jobs, over the holiday season. When people go on leave, when people go shopping, they go on holidays, etc. So the retail, the hospitality industry often create these short-term jobs. So you do find a bit of an anticlimax in the first quarter of the year where many of those jobs then go away. But look, we can't celebrate an unemployment rate which increases. We can't celebrate 290,000 less jobs. So I think for us, this has got to be, we have to treat this crisis of unemployment as our single greatest national crisis. We've got to treat it collectively as government, working with business and labor and ordinary society, the way we treated COVID-19. We've got to throw everything we have at it, because you can't sustain a society where 4 out of 10 South Africans and 7 out of 10 young people can't find work. That is a ticking time bomb that is going to explode one day if we really don't deal with it like the national crisis that it truly is.
Yeah. Is this plight taken seriously, Mr. Parks, especially in, amongst your alliance partners? And obviously one of them is the ANC, and I'm not pitting you against anyone, but I'm just wondering if one was a fly on those walls. These issues, are they seriously considered? Do they give you sleepless nights as the alliance? And because we hear Cosatu coming out vehemently against the numbers, against the plight of the unemployed, and obviously also protecting the rights of those who have jobs. But the seriousness with which this is treated by yourselves as a tripartite alliance, how impactful is that?
Look, we think it's yes and no. We think the president government does take us seriously. If you look at the first 2 drafts of the budget that was tabled at Parliament, we hope it carries through to the final draft. There's a significant increase in the public employment programs. So that's a positive thing, because mysteriously they had been cut for the last couple of years, which gave us a very worrying message. We have seen significant progress in fixing Eskom, because if you don't have reliable electricity, the economy can't grow. We've seen progress around stabilizing Transnet, because that's key to hundreds of thousands of jobs in the mining, the manufacturing, the agricultural sectors, and broadly to the economy as a whole. We've seen progress, reopening metro rail lines, which is key to transporting 10 million commuters in our cities, mostly workers, to work on time, so that boosts the urban economy. But, one appreciates all of that. But again, we've been sitting with this stubbornly high unemployment rate for more than 15 years. We've been sitting with economic growth at 1% for the past decade and a half. So we can't continue to normalize this crisis. It is going to explode on us one day. So yes, people do take...
How are you holding the ANC accountable then?
So we keep pushing the issues in the Alliance, at NEDLAC, in Parliament, and in public discourse like this. It is frustrating at times because we think these issues can be dealt with much faster. But having said that, we do appreciate that it's not just a question of the ANC and the Alliance dealing with the issue. It's a question of government moving with much greater speed, because you'll find at times municipalities returning money allocated for infrastructure unspent to government. You'll find at times provincial departments misspending money or retrenching workers, etc. But also, government's got to play its role. It's got to do much more, much faster, with a much more determined spirit. But the private sector too has also got to play its role, because government only employs about 10% of workers. It's always going to be like that, roughly.
Yeah.
The private sector has got to come to the party and say, what are they going to do to provide alternatives to retrenchment, to hire young people through internships? What are they going to do to give support to other businesses by buying locally produced goods, whether it's shoes or clothes or cars or furniture, etc.? But even us as citizens, consumers, the two of us must also say when we go to the shops, are we going to buy locally produced clothes, for example? So we've got to really have a mindset to turn it around.
Sure. The private sector will retort and they'll say, as soon as the climate is conducive, as soon as the labor relations regulatory framework is relaxed, we want to have the freedom to hire and fire as we please, to get things moving, and we are restricted. And I'm sure this is not new. You're not hearing from me for the first time, right? But I mean, often the corporates and the private sector comes up and says, well, Cosatu is a fine one to speak. They are the ones who are handcuffing us as far as mobility is concerned. They are the ones who are protecting individuals who are perhaps not delivering as they ought to. We'd love to create more jobs, but the environment is just not too conducive. The unions are also not helping and pushing us on strikes as regards to not just the conditions, but also the amounts of remuneration as stipulated.
So look, if treating workers like slaves, paying them peanuts, if that was a successful economic model, then apartheid would have delivered prosperity. We've tried that; it doesn't work. If you look at any African country which treats workers in subhuman conditions or pays them peanuts, they're not a success story. If you look at the successful economies, whether it's China, it's Singapore, whether it's Korea, Europe or US, they pay workers a living wage, they respect workers' rights. And the labor laws are not a burden because women must give birth to children. So maternity leave makes sense. That's how society survives. We're not going to go back to the dark ages of the 1800s and have child labor. We're not going to have a scenario where you expect workers to be productive and they work 18 hours, 7 days a week. So labor laws are actually about protecting workers' rights, but also actually boosting productivity, because workers can rest. If they can get paid a living wage, the economy takes off. It makes sense to invest in workers because those are the greatest economic asset of any workplace, public or private. If you don't pay workers a living wage, then it means the domestic worker walks for 2 or 3 hours from the Alex to Sandton because she can't afford transport. She'll come to work exhausted. If a factory worker can't afford medical care, he's going to be sick, he's going to miss work, productivity is going to decline. And if the very goods that companies produce, whether it's pizzas at a restaurant, whether it's cinemas, etc., if workers can't afford to pay for those goods, then who exactly is going to buy it? Because tourists are not going to come here to buy our shoes, our clothes, etc. So we have to look at things in a longer holistic view and view workers as our greatest economic asset. A worker who is happy, who's taken well care of, that'll be a productive worker. A worker who is abused won't be. If we look at the issue of strikes are there because labor relations collapse when employer and employees can't resolve an issue. But if you look at the Department of Labor's stats, they've actually declined precisely because unions are able to engage with employers to find solutions. Workers don't want to go on strike because normally the rule of no work, no pay is applied. So it's a sacrifice. There's always a port of last resort. But if you look at the stats, they've declined over the past decade because largely Cosatu and its affiliates have been able to engage with employers. And there's that spirit of social dialogue, of social compact, which has driven Cosatu. So hence at NEDLAC, we work very closely with government and business during the COVID-19 pandemic to make sure we manage the health and safety issues, protect workers' lives, enable companies to reopen safely. We work closely with the Department of Labor to release 65 billion rand to invest in companies so that they can retain those workers, they can pay those workers. Because ultimately we want companies to be successful because that means jobs will be saved and created and workers can get paid. But also means businesses too. And one of the issues we raised around local procurement companies must give solidarity to other companies. They must buy locally produced clothes, for example, because ultimately the solution to our crisis lies within our hands collectively.
Yeah. It's 17 minutes to 11 o'clock. You're on 7:02. I'm Thabo in for Clement. My guest, Matthew Parks, who is Cosatu Parliamentary Coordinator. We're talking about unemployment, how it is on the rise, and this is according to the numbers that came out yesterday, as you might have noticed. And amongst others, it pointed to about 237, which is 8.2 million people without jobs. And that's the increase of people without jobs. And the number of employed people decreased by 291,000 to 16.8 million. And so this is a very serious issue. And Matthew Parks joins us right now for this discussion. Feel free to participate, and you can do so on 011-883-0702, 011-883-0702. Alternatively, your voice note, you can send it to 072-702-1702.
The Clement Manyathela Show, live from Africa's Travel Indaba with South African Tourism on 702.
Staggering numbers, definitely worrying, of unemployment in South Africa, also affecting young people mainly. And but the numbers move from one to the other. It says that the employment, however, increased by 17,000 in informal sectors, and jobs were also added in transport, and this would be about 67,000, and finance space 60,000, and utilities 35,000. I'm looking at this and I'm just wondering that the informal sector is a bit agile, it's a bit flexible, and it's also encouraging that it's able to absorb. The informal sector is able to absorb a number of employed individuals in order to stimulate the economy. My guest, Matthew Parks, Cosatu Parliamentary Coordinator, joins us for this discussion. I did say that if you want to participate, you are most welcome to do so on 072-702-1702. You can send a voice note or a text message to that number. Alternatively, call us directly on 011-883-0702. This affects all of us, as my guest has said initially. It affects myself, you, the private sector, the government, NPOs, and everyone else concerned, because when we have high levels of unemployment, they do something as far as stagnation of the economy is concerned, and they lead to various other social ills that are unpalatable to a conducive environment of a healthy South Africa. Matthew Parks, welcome back. What is to be said about the ongoing and stable relationship between the employer and the trade unions in this instance? Because at times we get to interface with you when you are on the picket line, when there is a huge amount of dissatisfaction. How do we move closer together in order to stimulate the economy, but most importantly, to create jobs? That friction, does it have any impact on the number of jobs that are created, working environment that is healthy, and an economy that can do better?
So, look, I mean, I think to be fair to the media will often naturally capture so-called negative stories. You wouldn't always capture the good news stories that happen on a daily basis. But I can point to some of our unions who actually are very proactive, have a lot of foresight, work closely with industry. Doesn't mean they give them a blank check or a soft ride. So if I look at the clothing and the textile sector, SACTU, our clothing workers union in Cosatu, works very closely with the industry through the bargaining council to help assist struggling factories and employers, to also set standards across the sector to improve the condition of workers. But they would also actually quite actively drive local procurement. They would actually go and monitor government tenders, for example, or even private sector tenders for clothing, for textiles. And they'll go and phone an individual company in the factory saying, you should apply, you should submit an application for this tender, because that means that a contract will be given to that company. Those workers can remain employed, they can get a salary. It helps to sustain and to strengthen that company. It benefits members, it benefits the unions, etc. We've worked closely on many fronts on how to manage difficulties from COVID-19 to floods to the riots we saw in 2021, or the violence rather, to see how they circumnavigate it. Often we've had to intervene to work closely with the Unemployment Insurance Fund when factories or employees have struggled to access the monies. So we're in the same boat together. We'll have differences. Trade unions are about representing the workers' interests, negotiating a living wage, better conditions of service, improved working conditions, and so forth. But those also benefit an employer too, because if a worker is happy and productive, they'll work harder. Productivity of the company will improve. So we strongly believe in that kind of spirit, which you see in many Scandinavian countries, Germany and so forth, where you resolve the issues, the grievance of the employee with the employer. It's a rare instance when it leads to a strike, and that's really a failure of the labor market, collective bargaining. That's why you find unions are so correctly, jealously protective of collective bargaining, whether it's in the state or the private sector, because if you don't have that engagement, then it's very difficult to resolve issues, and ultimately, like you're saying, it will lead to conflict, which is not a good thing for anybody.
Yeah. Young people aged 15 to 34 seem to be having a serious problem, and they are considered vulnerable in the labor market space. Is it because of perhaps not knowing their rights too well? And also, what is to be said about those who've been in the workspace for too long? Are they hogging the space? Young people are not able to come through and participate in the economy. And I'm directly touching at a sensitive issue of early retirement in order to make young people a little bit more open to opportunities that the employment space can create for them.
Look, I think it's a couple of issues. Number one is we have to grow the economy. We've got to increase the number of people who are employed from just under 17 million to ideally about 30 million. We've got to reverse the people on social grants, which is about 27 million people if you include the SOD grant. So you've got to reverse those two ratios. The solution is not to send people who are close to retirement off packing. And in fact, with human lifespan increasing across the world, you're likely to see across the world, and even ourselves eventually, an increase in the working age, because the economy really can't afford to have people on retirement for 25 years. Pension funds are not, well-resourced enough generally across the world, but that's a discussion we'll come through in the next decade or so. But I think for us, the crisis really is around our skills and our education regime. Number one, we shouldn't be having people who are 15 years and under 18 looking for work. They should be in school, empowering themselves. So that's something we've got to fix as a society. But I think we need to have a frank conversation to say, do our schools, our TVET colleges, our CETAs, our universities, do they really provide young people, workers, students with the skills they need for the jobs of today and also the jobs of tomorrow? Because the economy is rapidly evolving. We need to make sure we have practical skills. So there are some good examples. If I look at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, as part of their degree requirements, all the students have to go through internships. They get graded upon it. They've got to achieve a certain amount of hours. So when they graduate with their degree or the diploma, they've got extensive experience at a workplace. They often walk straight back to the workplace and are hired immediately. So we need to have that kind of approach across our tertiary institutions. We need to have a frank discussion about our TVET colleges, where the graduation rate, the throughput rate, we are told is about 10%. So 90% of the people are not completing the certificates. That's a crisis because we spend a huge amount of money. The CETAs, to be honest with you, leave much to be desired. We see huge amounts of corruption, wastage there, pilferage, and yet that is workers' monies, and yet there's a
nepotism
for employers. Nepotism, all of that. Yeah. It's a cesspool, to be very polite. And so we need to really overhaul it, and also to link that all of these training programs to the needs of the economy, of employers, because there's a huge mismatch.
Yeah. Matthew, we touched on it a little bit earlier on, but I'm just thinking that honestly, we cannot necessarily cover the cracks with a paper, because those relationships that I spoke about between unions and employers are very critical, because at times you have unprotracted strikes. At times you do have people losing their jobs as a result of various actions that were not perhaps legal, and the casualty becomes the person who was participating. And this is not to blame you. I try my best to have fruitful discussions in a way that's not antagonistic, but we do have to unfold that piece of phenomena that generally the employer and the employee and the person in the middle, who would be yourselves, and yourselves I'm generalizing, by the way, I hope you get that, that relationship has to be smoother. It has to get to a point where there are compromises on either side. It cannot be that at times that a certain percentage is expected when the economy is not doing well, and equally so on the side of the employers. It cannot be that when profits are skyrocketing and the employee is not benefiting from those juicy fruit of profits from the shop floor, because they create them themselves. So perhaps without being long-winded, I want to find out, generally, how would you characterize that relationship, especially with the private sector? How would you point at it being a very intrinsic element of the economic growth in South Africa and job creation?
Look, it's a mixed bag. Where you tend to find things are going well is where you tend to find unions are well represented, workers are united under a union umbrella, and you tend to find issues being resolved quickly. So if you look during COVID-19, the workplace which had the highest vaccination rate is those which had the highest union membership rate, because there was a strong relationship between employer and employee. They could resolve issues, they could move together collectively to a lot of common agreed programs. Where you find often there's labour market strife is because maybe workers are not represented by unions, so there's no interface to resolve, to negotiate the issues. You also find that often there's labour market strife when employers choose to ignore the labour laws, whether it's minimum wage, it's health and safety, it's overtime, it's paid leave, etc., or a whole bunch of issues. And that creates issues. The labour laws are there to help provide for labour market stability, to help provide for a way to resolve grievances, to ensure workers' dignity and rights are protected and so forth. And so when you find compliance, you find issues are resolved better and the workplace can be productive and so forth. Collective bargaining is part of life. The point is to represent it, to manage it well, and to ensure a win-win outcome. But unions always, in most instances, go to negotiations to say we want 10 rand. The employer will offer 5 rand and you'll settle at around 7.5 rand. That's part of the process. But, it's critical to manage it delicately in a way which is win-win. And you find, the sectors which have strong unions often get it done very quickly and efficiently because they want members to be able to continue to work, to get paid, and they want the company to be productive. So the two need each other, but when there isn't a union partner, often that's when you find real problems.
Matthew, thanks for your time. Matthew Parks, Cosatu Parliamentary Coordinator.